Before we begin, this story contains descriptions of a mine disaster and prolonged entombment underground. If you need to step away, take care of yourself first. This episode's narration is AI-generated. The research, writing, and editorial decisions behind every story are made with care for accuracy and respect for those involved. Production note: insert 2 negative 3-second silence gap before cold open. November 1st, 1958. A rescue crew drills through debris deep inside number 2 KOLU Ray. The drill stops. One man presses his ear to the steel pipe. 3 taps. A pause. 3 more. Deliberate, rhythmic. Not settling rock. Someone on the other side was knocking back. Officials had declared there was no one left alive to knock. You're listening to the Unlit Room. Every story in here actually happened. That's the part that should scare you. New stories every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. Today, Nova Scotia, 1958. A coal mine collapses without warning and buries 174 men. More than 80 come out in the first 2 days. Then the rescue stops, and the world begins filing the rest as a closed chapter. Spring Hill, Nova Scotia, a town of 8,000 people. The collieries were its skyline, the shift whistle was its clock. At number 2 KOLU Re, a chalk blackboard near the entrance tracked shift counts by hand, men in, men out. The seam beneath Spring Hill had a reputation. Miners called the geological events bumps, the way fishermen used the word squall, ordinary language for something that was not ordinary. In 1891, an explosion in Spring Hill's collieries killed 125 workers. The town rebuilt. The miners went back underground. In 1956, a second explosion killed 39. The town rebuilt again. The miners went back underground again. This was the third generation working a mountain that had already taken 2 generations before them. By October of 1958, number 2 KOLU Re was running the deepest active coal seam in North America, tunnels extending more than 13,000 feet laterally from the entrance. The deeper you go, the more the earth presses back. Miners who worked that seam knew it. On the evening of October 23, 1958, 174 men descended for the Thursday night shift. They lit their headlamps and carbide lamps. They picked up their tools and went to work in the smell of coal dust and machine oil. There was nothing about that evening that was not ordinary. Spring Hill was the kind of place where the colliery didn't just employ the town, it was the town. The mine office handled the payroll that put food on every table on every street. When the shift whistle blew, the whole town heard it. When it didn't, the whole town noticed. Micro cliffhanger 1. At 8:06 that evening, the ordinary Thursday ended. It ended for 174 men at exactly the same moment. Unlike an explosion, there was no flash, no detonation that traveled ahead of a shockwave, no warning at all. What survivors would later describe to CBC radio was a deep, bone-felt creak, and then both walls moving inward simultaneously, the coal seam compressing, the mountain closing its fist. Geologists call it a rock burst, the sudden failure of an overloaded support pillar releasing stored energy. But the men inside didn't have time for terminology. The timber supports sheared, every lamp went dark simultaneously. The sound of settling rock continued for minutes after the initial event, rolling through the black with no clear direction. Men who weren't immediately pinned stood in total darkness, surrounded by a roar that was already becoming silence. Debris walls had materialized where open tunnels had been moments before. Mine manager Percy Rector was among those killed. Above ground, the first families arrived at the pit head within the hour. Emergency floodlights went up on metal poles, turning the entrance into a pale, bright island against the dark maritime fields. The chalk blackboard was brought out, and a Draeger men rescue team, specialized mine rescue workers in closed-circuit oxygen helmets and orange rubber suits, trained to operate in atmospheres where ordinary breathing equipment fails, was already suiting up. They went in immediately. The rescue work in the hours after a bump is methodical and slow. Draegermen move through collapsed tunnels in pairs, testing air quality as they advance, clearing debris by hand where machinery can't reach. The pace feels agonizing from the surface. Inside, it's the only pace that keeps the rescuers alive. Micro cliffhanger 2. By the end of the first 48 hours, more than 80 men had come out. It looked from the outside like a rescue story. The question was whether the number would stop there. The answer was already written in the rock. It wasn't a rescue story, not entirely. 74 or 75 men were confirmed dead. The tallies varied by source. Rescue teams pressing into the deep sections hit debris walls, compressed rock and sheared timber stacked from floor to ceiling, tunnels sealed as completely as if they'd never existed. No tapping, no sound at all. By October 25th, the deep sections had been officially sealed off. Rescue shift leaders stopped giving daily briefings by October 30th, 6 days after the bump. There was nothing new to say. International newspaper and television crews had camped at the pithead since the first night, filing rescue stories. Now they were filing wrap-up stories. Dispatches described women who hadn't slept since Thursday, still leaving plates at the table for husbands who hadn't come home. Time magazine's coverage described the Spring Hill disaster as a closed chapter. The families at the pithead watched the chalk blackboard. The survivor count hadn't changed in 6 days. Rescue officials said publicly that the odds of finding more survivors were, in their words, essentially nil. The mine had been silent for 6 days. The rescue leaders said it would stay that way. They were wrong by about 14 hours. But why had the mountain moved at all? The provincial inquiry pointed to 2 overlapping factors and found that neither alone told the whole story. The first pointed to extraction methods. In the years before 1958, Number 2 KOLU had intensified pillar extraction, removing coal support pillars left during initial mining to maximize yield. The Nova Scotia Department of Mines inquiry found this had concentrated mechanical stress in the deep seam until it failed catastrophically. A contributing factor. The second pointed to the Cumberland seam itself. Spring Hill's coal was geologically brittle and unusually deep. The seam had bumped in 1891 and 1956 under different operators and different conditions. Independent mining engineers argued it was structurally predisposed to failure, regardless of how aggressively it was worked. The inquiry acknowledged both. This was either a disaster that could have been mitigated, or one that was always going to happen. The evidence supports either conclusion. By the end of the first week, the families at the pithead had developed their own rhythms, the same faces in the same spots, the floodlit pithead unchanged, a shared quiet that wasn't the same thing as giving up, though the cameras couldn't always tell the difference. Micro cliffhanger 3. 7 men were alive behind that debris wall. They had been there all along, and one of them had made a decision somewhere in the total darkness that would be the difference between 7 survivors and none. In the early morning hours of November 1st, a rescue crew drilling in near silence heard rhythmic tapping from behind a sealed debris wall, 13,000 feet in. 3 beats, a pause, 3 beats. One of the rescuers knocked back on the pipe with his knuckle, the other side answered immediately. They broke through early that afternoon. 7 men were inside, alive after 8.5 days in complete darkness with no food and almost no water, surviving on thin seepage that bled through the coal face. When light entered the pocket for the first time, the 7 men shielded their eyes with their forearms. What kept them going wasn't food. It wasn't water. It was sound. Maurice Rudd-Ick, a father of 12, had started singing when darkness became total and the silence between the trapped men grew dangerous. Hymns first, then popular songs, then whatever came to him. He kept singing across 8.5 days because when he stopped, the other men stopped talking. And when men stopped talking underground, they stopped fighting. All 6 of his fellow survivors, Harold Brine, Gawley Kempt, Bowman Madison and the others, credited Maurice Rudd-Ick with keeping them alive. Not the rescue teams outside, not physical luck, the man who sang. Maurice Rudd-Ick was also the only black miner among the 7. When the survivors came to the surface, the story of Spring Hill went international. Press conferences, official receptions, public celebrations. Maurice Rudd-Ick was photographed, interviewed, and described in wire dispatches as the singing miner. He was celebrated. What the reporting of 1958 captured less clearly was the texture of that celebration. The degree to which the man all 6 survivors said had saved their lives was received, in the racial landscape of 1950s Canada, as something other than first among equals. He was present at every ceremony. He wasn't always present in the same way as the others. The miracle was real. The recognition of it was not equal. The Spring Hill bump of 1958 killed more than 70 people. A town of 8,000 lost its industry, its skyline, its clock. Number 2. Ko'el-U-Ri closed permanently in December of 1958 and never reopened. Spring Hill had to learn, for the first time in anyone's living memory, who it was without the mine. And the mine produced this, in its last chapter, 7 men who survived 8.5 days in the dark because one of them decided that silence was the greater danger. Maurice Ruddick made the choice to fill that compressed and lightless space with sound, and then made it again and again across more than 200 hours. He was a father of 12, a miner at the deepest working seam in North America. By unanimous testimony of the 6 people whose lives he saved, he was the reason they came home. The story of what happened in that pocket belongs to all 7 of them. What happened after, the way a country could celebrate a miracle fully only for some of the people who made it, that part of the story belongs to all of us. If this one kept you up tonight, good. New stories every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. Subscribe so the next one finds you too. That was the Unlit Room. See you in the dark.